Mr. Fergusson, I have some questions. We could have our own Fergusson supper, I'm sure, but unfortunately we only have a Robert Burns supper. We'd like to see through you why the man who felt inspired by you should be celebrated. Glimpses of the fertile soil in which Burns was planted.
I'm very honoured to be, in a manner of speaking, present at such a gathering, and it is a source of some amazement that a young Scottish poet is still accorded such adulation the world over, not least on the shores of the former colonies. I've heard much of how Haggis is celebrated in a piece by Burns. To think that such a thing would reach well beyond Caledonia.
Were you aware of Robert Burns in your day?
Alas, I was not at that time aware of this wee rapscallion who later succeeded me, but I have been since informed that both his father and mine were of Aberdeenshire, and both named William. It seems that he was writing his first song as a roving teenager when I met my untimely end, on which I shall not dwell, but I shall take up a much more nefarious subject, Edinburgh publishing, competition for which was most severe. I was the luckiest sod to have landed a chance for publishing my poems with Walter Ruddiman, a northerner like my father, and the people of Edinburgh seem to enjoy reading in their own language. I understand competition is still somewhat stiff amongst the capital's publishing houses, and there's apparently much to do about young boy wizards and so on.
In your use of the Scots language and Scots English, were you considered cutting edge, a rogue, a sellout?
Put simply, there are many who knew me to be a merry scoundrel of some experience, and thankfully those who knew me at university up in St Andrews have long since passed on. But I had a reputation for satire, gentle satire, I thought, though I surmised that writing in Scots would enable me to make political points that I simply could not get away with in the King's vernacular. A cutting edge, you say? Well, I must caution that innovation was still something of a naughty word in my day. Just ask my much beleaguered associate, David Hume.
Mr. Fergusson, did you prefer to write as a pastoral and satirical poet, or were you writing mostly popular things so you could eat?
Candour has my tongue, and I confess to you that it was really the necessity of caring for my mother and keeping myself afloat in the ranks of Edinburgh's finest and brightest that fired my poetic talents. Money would always be in short supply on account of my merrymaking in my beloved Cape Club. It was much as you would now see within a cocktail bar, but with the chance of conversing with the luminaries of the old town. Sandy Runciman, who painted my portrait, Deacon Brodie, though he certainly surprised us with his complicated family life. I do hope that posterity now views me as an Arcadian, a shepherd of the pen who happily hymned the glories of his mother city. But sadly, people just tend to see me as tragic. But life, as all things, is much more complicated than that.
Do you think a lot of writers at the time had a difficult time being artists?
To speak plain, I do suspect that many of my contemporaries were plagued by melancholy as I was. Indeed, my old companion James Boswell certainly was, yet was most honest in the admission. As a jest, I once told him that if I had to accompany that old Dr. Johnson up the Highlands, I too should be in a most anguished state. Life continues to excite me, though I no longer live it, and the wondrous energy of this present gathering amply rewards such excitement.
Where was the world of poetry heading when you checked out at about age 24? Did you feel you were changing the world of Scottish poetry?
I was young, wasn't I? I mean, do you know, I did feel as if I would set the world alight like a Scottish Heracles, but in so doing would make the men and women of Edinburgh feel pride in their language. And what a tongue it was and is. But if nothing else, there was another young Robert way over on the west coast of Scotland reading my Scots poetry. Now, there's a man who'd conquer Old Reekie and the whole world.
Before we go, can you recite a snippet from your own evocative poetry?
Oh, alas, something from my Old Reekie on Edinburgh. Old Reekie, warla ilka toon, that Scotland kens beneath the moon, where couthy chiels at evening meet, their busying crags and moos to weet.